My guests at Intermission for concert night tonight are two of my favorite people from the Dayton theater scene, both resident artists of the Human Race Theater Company, and both of whom acted in our production of Every Good Boy Deserves Favour. My guests are Bruce Cromer, who played Alexander Ivanov, or Alexander in the script, and Scott Stoney, who played Alexander Ivanov, known as Ivanov in the script. The two main protagonists of this amazing play with orchestra. So welcome, Bruce, and welcome, Scott. It's wonderful to have you on the show.
Nice to see you again, Neal.
So let's begin with what I've been doing with so many of my intermission guests for concert night, though I've stopped recently, is asking people what their experiences were during COVID, during the shutdown and during the COVID-wrecked past season. I've kind of stopped with the musicians because many of us are back to performing now, and almost everyone had a similar story. Had time to devote to pieces I never had time to work on before, and I taught lessons on Zoom and things like that. And so now we're talking more just about what's going on. But because you two come from the theater world, I imagine some things were the same, but some things may have been very different for you. So Bruce, why don't you tell us first what your COVID experience was like?
Well, I taught it at Wright State. I've just recently retired.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I crawled off the stage of All the Way at Cincinnati Shakespeare Company. It was February 15th, I think, and have not been on stage since. And maybe like Scott, I've been doing some radio, some voiceover stuff, but that's the way we were in theater. Everything was gone. All of the seasons that I had planned, I had lined up, I think, 3 shows. They were gone. And people, as everybody remembers, were saying, well, maybe 2 months, then we'll be back. And the reality kept hitting us harder and harder. But I had to teach online, and teaching acting and stage combat, movement classes online. Fascinating. I was down in my basement. But my wife and I are basically introverts anyway. We just sort of got very cozy. It was a warm up to the retirement. She had to put up with me more often. And once I got done finally with teaching, I've slowly gearing up to go back to Christmas Carol at the Cincinnati Playhouse. But now I'm faced with all of the COVID protocols, how we're going to stay safe. We can't have the little kids in the show because they can't be vaccinated. So it's going to be 13 and year olders. The Tiny Tim, I take it, is tiny, but he's not that young. He's 13 and plus. But again, what really hit me was I had this wonderful job at the university. So many artists that I know, theatrical artists, they were just set adrift. A lot of the New Yorkers came back home, lived with their parents, went back to their hometowns, and they were just waiting it out. But it hit the theater industry so hard.
And Scott, I saw you towards the end of the summer. I didn't see much of you because you were in the sound booth playing the recording engineer for the Human Race production of Looped, which was very fun. And you did wonderfully, although we barely got to actually see you. We heard a lot of you. So tell us what your COVID experience was.
Well, fortunately, or unfortunately, however you want to put it, I had retired from university teaching right about the beginning of it. I was a professional adjunct. I started at Sinclair. I spent 35, 40 years there. And then the last 10 years of my teaching, I was bouncing around from university to college to university that had holes in their artistic programs. I come with certain skills, well, much like, Bruce at Wright State, acting, so I was teaching acting at Clark State. I taught out at UD for a while. I did have a couple of classes out at Wright State, but And really, my retirement had to do a lot with generation gap. I kept seeing the distance between the students and me getting wider and wider and wider. And along with that came a realization that we didn't have that much in common, and it was just time. So I've been retired for most of the COVID, which meant I've been spending it doing pleasant things. Because of the summer, I've been outside, I've been riding a lot on bicycle. I love riding bicycle. I read excessively. I sit on the porch. I feed the birds. We have a bird feeder in our tree, and I sit out there and I watch them. And it's pretty wonderful. And at the same time, I am a little bit crazy with just trying to figure out, well, what do I do to fill my time artistically? I have been volunteering. I met a woman named Margaret Piat when I was doing old case files over at the courthouse, which we will start up again, I believe, this next summer.
Good.
The COVID kind of killed that for a while, but I've been volunteering at her home, which is the Piat Castle. It's called Makochik. And I've been cataloging the library, which is this incredibly large room with books on all walls, and going through them. They haven't been touched, I'd say in at least 75 years, some of these books. And I am titling them and entering information. So that fills some of my time too.
And when you finish that, you can go to Bruce's basement and catalog all of his books. that we
Please,
see.
all of the things. that
I have
taken
my own
from-
library. No, I don't need anyone else. I've been trying to get rid of some of them, as a matter of fact, ones that I don't use anymore.
You two gentlemen are two of my favorite people in the theater. Both as an audience member, I've seen you in many, many productions over the years, but also some of my favorite theatrical collaborators. We have worked together separately on many different projects, but I think that Every Good Boy Deserves Favor is the only time that we have all worked on the same project together.
Absolutely.
This extraordinary play with orchestra, which is pretty much unlike anything else in the world. So I'm just curious to know, you guys both have done all kinds of things in theater. You know, serious theater, comedy, classics, new works, all kinds of things. Where does Every Good Boy Deserves Favor fall on the range of things that you've done? And what was the experience like doing a play with an orchestra where the orchestra is actually part of the story, not just playing music in the background?
Well, I think part of the complication and challenge of it was, and I read a news article at Dayton News back in 2005 when we did it, dealing with the unions. You've got the musicians, you've got the actors. So how often can they get together? And this is what when we've done other things together, Neal, and it's just been me and the orchestra, it's such a condensed amount of time, and you are all very good and skilled and can pick up your instruments and do it 3 rehearsals and boom, go straight into performances. Scott and I take a little bit longer and are used to 4 weeks of rehearsals. My major memory is, again, it was just very concentrated. And I'm always the Schuster is pretty terrifying to me anyway. The audience goes on and on and on and on. But when you are surrounded by the orchestra, you can't feel a more solid sense of support there. That I know, I just sort of hung on to the music. It feeds you. And the musicians, literally in that show, they were right to our sides. The stage was, again, a set, as well as the orchestra being amongst the set pieces.
For me, when I think back on that, I agree, at how intense it was, absolutely. Fortunately, I had some experience with Neal in the Schuster singing. So being on stage in front of an orchestra, or in some way close proximity, was a little more familiar for me. Plus, I had the advantage of being the character that really had an orchestra.
Correct, because you.
So I didn't have to do a whole lot of acting. I could just look around and there they were. You
Now,
know, and it may sound like an excuse or something, but boy, was that helpful, you
Now,
know,
we
for
should,
any actor.
I should interrupt and say, for the benefit of our audience who haven't heard the piece yet, that yes, Scott, your character Ivanov has an orchestra, but it's an orchestra that exists only in his imagination. They are there. I don't mean to step into your delusion and take the role of your therapist, but so the orchestra that Scott is referring to is an imaginary orchestra. But of course, from the audience's standpoint, it's very real because it's right there. You can't miss it.
Right.
And there were times where Scott would, you'd criticize like the timpani or the triangle player.
Absolutely.
No, you were the triangle player, right?
Right.
Only
Yes.
you. Yeah.
Standing on the bed.
But the musicians, you could actually see the musicians, and I'm sure with the DPO, they were reacting. You're talking about how that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They were feeding me all the time. Yeah, it was my delusion, but you know, I had the advantage of having the given circumstances were right there. Right there. I didn't have to pretend to be pretending or, to have a delusion. I just looked around and it was right there. And it puzzled me that you never saw them or heard them, So in terms of authenticity, that was such an incredible experience for me because of that. It was authentic. They were there. I was there. I'm playing a real triangle and you're the crazy one. And yet in the play, I'm the crazy one and he's a political prisoner.
But that's so interesting because I've been lucky enough to do 2 productions of this play in my life. So I've known it for a very long time, but I never thought of that. I never thought of the fact that the orchestra being actually there means that in a way you don't have a delusion, and that Bruce is the person who's a little bit off because clearly there's an orchestra there, but he doesn't hear it and he doesn't see it. And
Yeah.
so now
Scott,
I'll have to do another production where my mindset is informed with that information.
Well,
Scott,
Neal,
you were conducting a lot too, right? Weren't you conducting?
Oh, yes. Yes.
So, Neal, do you remember, did you and Scott have any little reactions as imaginary conductor? And
Not a lot.
Not really. We didn't need to.
Right.
I could watch you and I took a lot of cues from what you were doing.
Yeah.
And as long as it didn't interrupt the actual orchestra, because you've got your track to play and I've got mine, it worked beautifully.
And I have in the score there are Post-it notes with every once in a while it'll say, cue Scott for this thing, but then there's some where I'm taking a cue from Scott to make sure that something begins off of his instructions to the orchestra.
that's where it was well cast. Scott has a wonderful musical talent, which I am totally devoid of. So he could conduct, and he knows what he's doing because he has conducted. So
yes,
that was part of my joy.
Yes, I do remember, Neal, that there was one section where I needed to have the actual copy of the score to see where the orchestra was going because of my timing. It was a section somewhere in the middle, but that was really one of the only places where we really needed to be on the same page, and I needed to see the page and see the music.
Right.
One of the things I was going to comment on, having looked around at other productions of EGBDF, I am so grateful that we were front and center because we really were in the middle of that orchestra. And that made all the difference in the world. I've seen productions where, the actors are over to the side or the back behind, that kind of thing. But being right there, bed conductor, it was incredible.
yes, we had this amazing set that Dan Gray had designed where the orchestra was within the set and there were walkways and things and playing areas. So it really did make it so that it was a play with orchestra, an organic entity, and not something where the play and the music were separated. It did make it a little funny because we had to play the first half of the program, which was music of the audience just heard, of Mendelssohn and Schubert and Beethoven, with the orchestra in this unusual kind
Right,
of
configuration.
chopped up
Yes.
configuration, but it worked just fine. So I don't often have the opportunity to talk to artists in other disciplines like I have here. So I hope you'll indulge me with this question about craft and how your professional way of working works. Just because it always fascinates me how different artists apply their skills in their own discipline. So we did this play more than 15 years ago, and as professional actors, you carry around with you in your brains somehow a repertoire of plays that you've done. Especially if you think Shakespeare, something, there are actors who, if you say, you're Romeo in Romeo and Juliet, they will know their lines, at least the big soliloquies and things like that. I imagine this is most likely not a play that you've carried around with you for 15 years, but how does that work? That whole process of memorizing a part, and then how much of it sticks and how much of it is a question of brushing up when you return to a role after a gap. I'm dying to know how that works.
It's going to be different for every actor.
Sure.
I think that I am probably more unique than most actors because I can't keep everything in my head. It all goes out when I no longer need it there because I got to make room for the next project, whatever that is, so consequently, I can't quote all the Shakespeare that I've done. I can't quote lines from anything, really.
Oh, you could sing. I know
I
your
can-
songs
I-
would come back.
Songs, yes, but that's because that's been the center of my craft for so long. What's interesting about EGBDF is that before I got to do the thing with you and with Bruce, I used that opening monologue for auditions without an orchestra because it's a great monologue, where he's criticizing the instruments and saying, go back here, and fungoid log rollers spreading wet rot through the woodwinds. There's a line. Aha, I remembered that much.
You remember a lot.
I just surprised myself. But
That's
I
a great
think that
Stoppard
probably,
line too.
it is. Stoppard was brilliant, but I think that stuck because it was an audition piece for so many years. And then I got this opportunity to do it. Oh my God. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. That's all I can say is thank you. Bruce, I know you probably have a lot more lines stuck in your head.
Well, it does, and part of it's teaching, because I get to trot it out every now and then. But yeah, the great thing about doing Shakespeare is you do it over and over again. I don't know how many times Scott's done Romeo and Juliet, but I never have to see it again, never have to do it again. Hamlet, you run through the roles. You start out playing, Laertes for Horatio, and then you go to Hamlet, then you go to Claudius, and then I have yet to do Polonius, but that is on my wish list. But I think what's interesting is because Shakespeare is verse, it sticks more, like songs.
It's a lyric.
Yeah, it's there. You do have to touch on it every now and then. But two, maybe it's because the classics, you keep seeing them. They keep resurfacing. EGBDF, again, I know I went and I did my research. I saw Ian McKellen was, I think, in the original production. Fabulous cast through the years. Patrick Stewart eventually did a tour with his Star Trek Next Generation cast across America. Gates McFadden and Brent Spiner and Jonathan Frakes. But it was a show I was unfamiliar with, and it happened so fast. Shows that happen quickly, I just get nervous about because I take months to learn lines. I'll know I'm doing a show 3 or 4 months ahead of time. And I'm using, like Bill Nye, I use all that time to get it stuck in my head. That's the last thing I want to be worrying about. Yeah. But you have to eject them. I agree with Scott. It's like, it's got to be gone because I got to make room for the next one.
Well,
Good. I'm glad to hear you say that.
that's so interesting, and it's funny. Personally for me, there are little fragments of my it's all it was. My high school up through freshman year of college was the last time I did anything in theater. But someone will mention Brazil, and I will say, Charlie's Aunt from Brazil, where the nuts come from, and it just pops into my head unbidden.
Neal, when you talk about craft, though, the thing that always moves me that I talk about in my classes, I do a little Tai Chi with my classes, but to see you backstage doing a kata, and the first time I saw that, I was going, that's how this man has this wonderful, calm control. I've never seen you angry. I'm sure you get stern, but I've never seen you angry. I just, you can be the calm in the eye of the storm. But that was a very essential thing for me, craft-wise, doing the little rehearsals that we'd have for a DPO production, and then having to prepare to go out on that stage, not really knowing what was going to occur. That's a part, you always do that, right?
I do normally, unless something is going wrong. The last few minutes before a performance, I spend backstage doing at least some of the Tai Chi form, and some of it is that the Tai Chi is something that, I've done it for many, many, many years, and it is something that helps you focus. It also, because balance and relaxation is an important part of it, even though it's the most important part, even though it's a martial art, I find it useful because that's part of what you do standing on the podium, is that you have to, in effect, project energy and force to the orchestra, but without being tense yourself. Because not only if you're tense, you end up with tendonitis, but I also find if I'm tense on the podium, I don't hear as well. My ears kind of close up, and I'm not as aware of what's going on in the orchestra. But some of it is
the three of us in this piece. You've got that very heavy André Previn music. Scott is playing someone who's
off the rails.
Yeah, I'm ill, and either on I can't remember again. It was just illness from being imprisoned.
And hunger strike is part of it.
Yeah, hunger strike.
Just for part of
right.
the time.
But you having to drive that bus for 3 performances or whatever, we are all coming at that same problem in different ways. How do you play this character and bring some truth to it without exhausting yourself and or indulging so much the audience can't care?
It's that focus, and that's exactly why you do it. It focuses all of your energies in the direction that you want, which is, I think, what all performers do. Absolutely. Certainly, Bruce, you use the physical. For me, it's Lesak, because that was a big part of my training, and it's a vocal, but it's also very much a body technique. So, we all have it, but it's a way of, getting rid of all the external distractions.
Which is why we all three do what we do, yes? It's the immersion and the escape from pandemics and politicians that you disagree with. It's the way to have a controlled amount of time and bring the audience into that. That's why I think we all do it.
And it's something which is very, very rewarding, I think, for each of us as we do it, because we are totally immersed in the performance and what it takes to do that performance. So, you can't afford to think about, you know, did I pay the electric bill yesterday or do I have to worry about it tomorrow? You know,
Yeah,
you can't think about those things. They all fall away and you are just in the moment. And then when you leave the stage, they can all come flooding back. But also, as you say,
that's
that's what that's the experience we want for the audience. We want the audience to leave their worldly cares behind for an hour or two and experience this other thing, which hopefully will then give them a new perspective and give them, you know, the get up and go to do what has to be done when they leave the theater.
Well said.
yes, I would absolutely agree.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for first of all for doing the project. It was really just such an amazing experience to do this play and to do it here in the Schuster Center with this marvelous cast. But also thank you for joining us to talk about it a little bit more and to talk about life and performing in our crazy era. We all very much appreciate your time, and I look forward to whenever the next chance is that A, I can see you on stage, or B, we can work together because it's
Yes.
always fun.
Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
so much.
Yeah.